Welcome to this virtual editorial board meeting from Inside Sources. I am Michael Graham, managing editor at InsideSources.com. Back during COVID, when reporters and other people like you were not able to go out and do your job, we put this concept together of a virtual ed board to bring people together that you would want to ask about a specific topic that was in the news at the time, so that people working from home, whatever, could log on, ask questions, get great content all within an hour. Just 1 hour, you got a story and walk away. And we've done a lot of fascinating and terrific topics, and we have one that directly impacts public health and also directly impacts where we're coming from, which is Boston, Massachusetts, my old stomping grounds as a radio talk show host. Normally we're in Washington, D.C., but we're here because Massachusetts is leading the way on something called the Nicotine-Free generation. What does that mean? What are the public health impacts? Well, I'm not smart enough to explain that, but we have a terrific panel of people who can. With us are Dr. Michael Siegel, Department of Public Health and Community Medicine at Tufts University School of Medicine, Dr. Jeff Willett, who leads the project to end smoking at the Progressive Policy Institute, and Deputy Chief Wayne Harris, retired, of the Rochester, New York Police Department. We'll also be taking your questions, so you're logged on to our video stream. There's a little questions button there. Send the questions and we will get to your questions later in the conversation. You got a question for a story you're working on, or for a project you're working on, or for your think tank, we definitely want to hear from you, and you can use the Zoom question feature there. But I want to start with you, Dr. Siegel. You're the local guy, you're from Tufts. So tell us how you got to the tobacco nicotine harm reduction debate, conversation, public health issue. And then also, you're in Massachusetts. What is this, I can't buy nicotine if my birthday is the wrong day? Could you please explain that to normal people?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's really a pleasure. I have been in the tobacco control movement for most of my career, so for approximately 35 years. And just to give you a sense of my background, I have been a very strong anti-smoking advocate. I was part of the campaign to eliminate smoking in bars and restaurants. I testified in lawsuits against the tobacco industry. I worked at the Office on Smoking and Health at CDC. So I've dedicated most of my career to essentially the goal of trying to end tobacco-related diseases.
Right.
When I started in this movement, the goal was to end smoking. That was the goal. In fact, Massachusetts is notorious for having an anti-smoking campaign that the slogan for it was, "Let's make smoking history." That was the campaign. Started in 1993, and it ran for about 10 years or so. And we've largely succeeded in that, at least in terms of youth. Among adults, we've made great progress, but there are still about 25 to 30 million smokers out there. The nicotine-free generation idea is, let's stop the next generation from getting addicted to nicotine products. And so what these laws do, and they're typically passed at the city level or the town level, they basically say that if you are born after a certain date, you cannot buy nicotine products. And the age is usually set so that, people who are already adolescents are not affected. But as the new generation comes up that is not yet at smoking age, they wouldn't be able to buy tobacco products. It would be illegal to sell them tobacco products. And the idea here is let's prevent the next generation from becoming addicted to these products. So I want to make just a couple brief big picture points about these policies. The first one is that the data show that only 14% of youth obtain their cigarettes from actually buying it in stores.
Right.
So from a conceptual perspective, it's not even rational that these policies would be successful, because 86% of youth right now are able to get cigarettes, who want to smoke are getting cigarettes anyway. So by stopping the sale of cigarettes to minors, it's not going to have any effect. And in fact, we know from very solid research that laws that ban the sale of tobacco to youth, especially when the age is set at 18, is not effective, because if youth want to smoke, they're going to find a way to get these products. I think that there is a symbolic value in this, and that it's kind of saying, it's making a statement about, that nicotine use is a problem.
Right.
But in terms of its actual impact, I don't think that's really gonna be, I don't think we're gonna see a major impact. However, I think the most important thing that people need to know is that in Massachusetts, every single town, every one that has passed a nicotine-free generation law has also passed another law that bans the sale of all flavored e-cigarettes, basically everything except tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes, in stores. With the slight exception of tobacco-only stores,
Right, sure.
that are only sold to people who are only allowed people who are over 21 in them. And so what these towns are basically saying is, we want to stop youth from smoking, but if you're already smoking, we're not going to make this product available to you. We're going to make it incredibly difficult for you to get this product. In every one of the towns in Massachusetts that has one of these laws, anyone can walk into a convenience store and pick up a pack of Marlboros.
Correct.
The most deadly product probably on the planet. No problem. But if you're a smoker and you're trying to quit and you're using flavored e-cigarettes, you can't find it in your town. And that's a problem. I'm in this because I saw patients dying from smoking. And we can't abandon them. And I think what we're doing with these laws, the towns that are passing these laws, and at the same time trying to eliminate electronic cigarettes, is they're abandoning smokers.
Well, Dr. Willett?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm a sociologist who's worked in tobacco control, not quite as long as Dr. Siegel, but for over 2 decades. I've led state tobacco control programs in Ohio and New York State. And for 7 years, I served as a national vice president with the American Heart Association, where I helped lead aspects of the Heart Association's tobacco control efforts. I ultimately left the field of tobacco control because of substantive disagreements that I had with the field's treatment of people who smoke, its kind of end game, or like what's the ultimate goal considerations, and its policy treatment of lower risk nicotine products, which Dr. Siegel was just kind of referring to. I'm currently the director of the Project to End Smoking at the Progressive Policy Institute. PPI is a center-left policy think tank in Washington, D.C., and the Project to End Smoking is really formed around 3 core beliefs. The first is the recognition that cigarettes are the most deadly, dangerous form of tobacco. Cigarettes kill roughly 500,000 Americans every year. There are still 25 to 30 million American adults who smoke cigarettes. We also know that most adults who smoke want to quit. If you ask every smoker in the United States if they've ever tried to quit, I'm sure almost all of them would say at some point, yes, they've tried to quit. Just this year alone, half of all people who smoke cigarettes will try to quit. But the reality is that the existing public health interventions that are focused on complete abstinence from nicotine and tobacco products aren't sufficient. They're not sufficient to help people quit smoking. They're important, they need to be part of the mix, but there's a huge unmet population of people who want to quit, who've tried to quit, who've been unable to do so. So that opens the door to harm reduction. It opens the door to the concept of, for those people who've otherwise been unable to quit, we should be encouraging them and creating opportunities for them to switch to a significantly lower risk nicotine product. And then also the belief that public health can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can both protect youth. We can both minimize youth use and dramatically accelerate adult smoking cessation. That's what a public health victory should look like. Today, rates of youth nicotine use in the United States are historically low. There have been substantial reductions in e-cigarette use from its peak a few years ago. Less than 2% of kids use nicotine pouches, smoke cigarettes, etc. There's a huge public health victory that no one's talking about when you look at how far down youth use has been driven. But again, 30 million adults who smoke.
Chief Harris?
Well, good morning, Michael. Thank you for inviting me.
And I have a specific question to inform you. Just like I bothered poor Professor
Okay, yes,
Siegel.
sir.
Why is law enforcement part of this conversation about laws regarding nicotine, tobacco, sales, youth, etc.?
Well, the short answer is that someone has to enforce the policies that are put in place. And unfortunately, oftentimes our legislatures put policies in place that have consequences that they don't factor into when they're writing these policies, and it lands on law enforcement to address. So I'm retired deputy chief of police. I spent a little over 30 years with the Rochester, New York Police Department. I got into this conversation because my last assignment with the Rochester Police Department was as their deputy chief of community engagement and relations, which meant I went out into the community to speak to them directly as to how they felt about the police department, but also to gather recommendations from the community as to how we could be better. After I left uniformed service, I began consulting in all realms of policing, and there's a couple of truths that exist out there. Number one, most people really don't understand what policing is. They think they do because of what they see on TV or what they see in the movies, but there's a lot of nuance that goes into what law enforcement actually is. And I'll start by saying this: none of what we see out there exist in silos. Everything is interconnected. So when you have a bad policy, it will eventually trickle down to the community, which will lead to the intersection of police and the community, which, as we've seen in the news, oftentimes becomes negative. So I got into this conversation relative to tobacco as it relates to prohibition. Prohibition is a strategy that we've been trying here in the United States for decades, and it has never worked. It did not work with alcohol. It did not work with the war on drugs in the 1980s, and it's not going to work, as it relates to tobacco or tobacco products. And I'm glad I'm glad that we're having this conversation right now relative to age-related consumption. This is a strategy that has been tried elsewhere. This specific strategy was tried in New Zealand, and unfortunately it failed to the point of their repealing the law that they put in place. I shall qualify my statements by saying I do not smoke. I have had family members that have lost their lives because of their tobacco use, but combustible tobacco use. And I'm here solely because of the intersection of law enforcement and the community as it relates to policy that's written that governs us.
Great. Well, you set us up for the place I want to start, which is the idea of prohibition. And so, starting with you, Dr. Willett, why, you're a social scientist, so the idea is people shouldn't smoke. And we all agree if we get everyone to put down their cigarettes tomorrow, we would do it if we had a magic wand. So they shouldn't do it. Everyone agrees. Why does a prohibition work, and what are the consequences when you try prohibition, like saying to everyone, sorry, you were born after this date, you cannot have these products? Does that work?
Yeah, well, I think there are two key questions for me. So the first is, does prohibition help people quit smoking? Will it help us end smoking faster? Generally, the answer is no, but specifically with this policy, it's absolutely no. This policy does nothing to support adults who are smoking, This is gradual implementation of adult prohibition. It ignores, I would say it abandons people who smoke. And then the second is, well, what behaviors does prohibition create, So public health is all about, creating an environment, a social environment where you encourage people to do certain behaviors, you discourage them from doing other behaviors. Tobacco control's history is full of policies and programs that denormalize tobacco. You want to discourage people from using the product, right? So what behaviors does prohibition create in this form? Well, as Dr. Siegel said, kids don't purchase nicotine products from stores. They get them through other sources. So a retail sales restriction for legal sales, what impact will that have on kids? Big question mark there. What impact will it have on adults who should be switching to other products or quitting? None. It will have no impact on current adults. And then what impact will it have on the behavior of the marketplace? Prohibition doesn't end demand. It doesn't end consumer demand. So what it will do is it will lead to illicit suppliers, illicit supply chains, and illicit sales that create more problems in this instance than it provides any pragmatic solutions whatsoever.
Chief Harris, what does that look like when a product moves to the not legal market? You were in that business, particularly upstate New York, which has had issues with illicit tobacco sales, et cetera, in the past.
In fact, the statistics show that most of the cigarette sales that occur in the state of New York are already illegal because they're untaxed. So let's start with defining what illicit looks like.
Okay.
When we think of prohibition, we think of the 1920s and alcohol and the speakeasies and the underground sales of alcohol. That's occurring right now as it relates to cigarettes. Really? Yes. So consider that if we say you can't buy this, okay, yet I can go into a specific area of the state, and to speak very frankly, the Native American reservations right now are continuing to sell cigarettes at an alarming rate. I can go into a reservation with a U-Haul van and fill up the back of that van with cartons of cigarettes and then come and sell those on the streets. Sure. That's the illicit market that we're talking about. It's not necessarily gangsters, although we are seeing some areas of the country where gangs have figured out that it's less problematic, to sell narcotics, to sell cigarettes than it is to sell narcotics. But illicit also means that if Mr. Harris decides to go to that Indian reservation and buy up a truckload of cigarettes and come and sell them out of the back of that truck, that's an illicit market. That's how the cigarettes that the doctor is explaining or mentioning are actually getting to the hands of kids. And, Doc, thanks for suggesting or reminding folks that youth cigarette consumption right now is at an all-time low. It's really, really almost non-existent. Unfortunately, what they are smoking is cannabis. Right. So as we're thinking about these policies, and as Massachusetts is considering putting policies like this in place, they really need to consider that there is going to be a consequence to that. People will find a way to get the products that they want. This is very similar to when Massachusetts attempted to prohibit menthol tobacco. They simply went out of state. They went into Connecticut, they went into New Hampshire, they went into New York State, and what they saw was that, number one, their smoking rates didn't really decline very much, but the state ended up losing a boatload of revenue for it. So
yes, they did.
If you're creating a situation where it's becoming detrimental to your community, but also creating an illicit market that is going to create the intersection of police and our community. And unfortunately, usually our socioeconomically poor communities, our communities of color that are out there, that's when it becomes problematic or
Dr.
potentially
Siegel?
Problematic.
So, Michael, we actually don't have to speculate about what happens with a prohibition for nicotine products. We know the answer because we can observe what happened. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, has basically prohibited the manufacture and sale of electronic cigarettes, except for a very small number of products that is specifically approved. And in order to get on that list, you have to submit these very complex applications. What has happened is that 70% of the electronic cigarette market right now is illicit. It's essentially black market products. The youth who are vaping, and there's only 5.2% of them, according to the 2025 National Youth Tobacco Survey.
Can you say that again? Because people think it's like all the kids are vaping or 25% are vaping. What's the real number?
So just yesterday, the results of the 2025 National Youth Tobacco Survey came out, and that's the most recent data we have. And in that survey, only 5.2% of youth, middle school and high school youth, are vaping. And that's down, and it is down drastically from 2019, and it continues to decline. I should note that the same survey shows that only 1.2% of that age group are smoking combustible cigarettes. But right now, most of the youth who are using electronic cigarettes they're not buying the approved products. 70% are using illicit products, and most of them are using disposable e-cigarettes. none of which have been approved by the FDA and which are technically illegal. So we don't have to ask the question. We know that essentially the FDA, in trying to control the safety of this product, has done just the opposite. It's created a market where 70% of the products are not regulated,
Sure.
and then we don't know what's in them at all.
Can you talk?
Can I just want, so to the doctor's point, the FDA has approved 41 products to be sold or to be approved
In
for
the whole
sale
country.
in the whole country, out of thousands of products.
There's more than 41 when I go to the convenience store, just in the bin by the cash register.
And that's why it's such a problem. So as we're talking about, these products that have not been approved by the
Right.
FDA, they're unregulated, meaning we don't know what's in them. We don't know what chemicals have been used. We also don't know where they're coming from. And what we're finding through law enforcement is that most of the unregulated product that's coming in is coming from countries that we may not necessarily want to have products from. For example, China.
So one of the things that happens when I talk to people about this overall topic, which we've covered at Inside Sources for a while, is they say, well, vape, cigarette, cigar, whatever, hookah, whatever, you name it, it's all the same, except pot. Everyone has a special place in their heart for pot. I don't know why. Dr. Willett, when people say vape, cigarette, it's the same thing, what are they getting wrong?
Well, I think the biggest misperception that exists is around the hazards associated with nicotine specifically versus combustible cigarette smoking. And a nice rhetorical advocacy device that a lot of tobacco control groups is they use broad terms like tobacco use kills this many people, nicotine causes this many people to die, etc. There are significant differences in health risks between cigarette smoking specifically and other forms of nicotine use. So FDA has been crystal clear about that. FDA has been crystal clear that there's a continuum of risk across tobacco products, with cigarettes and other combustibles being the most harmful. And they've made that conclusion through multiple presidential administrations, Obama, Trump,
Sure.
Biden, Trump. And so that's the biggest misperception. So, the FDA has only authorized a small number of products. That is true. But the products that have been authorized have undergone very rigorous scientific review. It includes a toxicological review. It includes assessment of use potential. It includes potential that adults will switch to these products. So there's a federal regulatory agency has concluded there's a continuum of risk. It's concluded this subset of products should be sold in the United States because it's actually appropriate for the protection of public health. And then, communities are banning those. Tobacco control and other groups are trying to equate nicotine with all the harms associated with cigarette smoking and other tobacco use.
So the point is you want to get people to put down cigarettes specifically. And if you can get them to put that down, they're already on the right path. You want eventually nothing, but if you can get them to put down the cigarette, that's the goal. What Dr. Siegel, does the age-based approach do to the goal of getting people to put down cigarettes?
So the age-based approach doesn't really do anything because it certainly doesn't affect people who are already smoking. And for most youth, the reason why we only have 1.2% smoking is not because there's no way they can't get it at a store. They can't buy it. The reason is because it's become socially unacceptable. Social norms have changed, and that's what makes cigarettes. It's just not cool like it was when we were in high school. And so that's what's driving youth combustible cigarette use down, not the fact that they can't buy it. So that these laws are not going to have an impact. The problem is that at the same time that we're implementing these smoke-free generation or nicotine-free generation laws, the same very towns that are doing that have also implemented bans on electronic cigarettes. 99% of electronic cigarettes that adults are using to quit smoking. Here's a statistic that I think, if there's one statistic I think people need to know, 5 million people in the United States, 5 million adults have quit smoking successfully using electronic cigarettes. 5 million. this is a public health miracle. When I started in this field,
Right.
if anyone told me, you could save 5 million people's lives,
Right.
I'd say that's crazy. But it's happened. And what these ordinances are doing, these laws are doing, is essentially they're taking the greatest public health miracle probably of my
Right.
lifetime and basically throwing it in the toilet and saying, because we are, so adamant about the possibility that somebody might get pleasure from using nicotine,
Sure.
we're going to, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and we're going to essentially make it incredibly difficult for adults to use
Right.
these products to quit smoking.
My favorite H.L. Mencken quote, Puritanism is a fear that someone somewhere may be having a good time. I hope someone somewhere is watching this having a good time, and you have questions for our panelists. Remember, use the Zoom option on your on your screen and post your questions. We'll be happy to read them with the panelists. I want to ask about the premise that, and this, I guess, start with you, Dr. Willis, since you're the sociologist, but I'm sure the law enforcement pro will have something to say about this too. Teenagers are just going to do dumb things. I mean, they just are. And so if you can make the path towards not as risky dumb easier than than the path toward really, in other words, if you're going to, like you said, have a pack of Marlboros right there for every, just no prohibition, and you've taken everything else away, they're going to be happy to be done with a Marlboro as they are dumb with an e-cigarette. Am I getting that? And I know that's deep scientific stuff from my deep scientific background.
Yeah.
Am I in the ballpark here?
Well, I mean, we know that that youth are risk takers, that there are certain youth that are more likely, to take risks and do any number of things that we would prefer that they not do. But they're kids.
Right.
We've all been teenagers. We all know what that environment is like, and we've all probably done things that we would prefer that we not do. But that's life. And so, the whole prohibition thing was kind of litigated within tobacco control in 2007, 8, 9, leading up to the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. So, groups testified before Congress, asking Congress to give FDA the authority to regulate tobacco products. There were youth protections in that law, but there were also pathways. There were pathways for FDA to authorize new lower risk products. And in testimony, the tobacco control group said, hey, that would be great. If there's an opportunity for lower risk products to go through FDA rigorous scientific review and be sold, that provides an option for people who can't smoke. So that's the lower risk alternative that you're talking about. But I would also say in that same testimony, tobacco control groups, when they were talking about a potential ban, or when they were talking about the FDA being so stringent that it wouldn't actually authorize new products, said virtually all public health experts disagree with banning the products, that would be infeasible and undesirable. And it's
so even the most aggressive, like American Heart Association or Tobacco-Free Kids, they don't support the government tomorrow saying we're just going to criminalize cigarettes because they see that is not smart.
They certainly testified before Congress suggesting that would not be smart, and chose a completely different pathway for tobacco control. A regulated marketplace where there were scientific decisions made about lower risk products that could be sold to consumers.
But it seems to me, Chief, that if you say in a town, we're going to have this age-based law, that's prohibition. You've got a generation, it's not the nicotine-free generation, it's the we're going to try prohibition on you generation. Am I understanding that correctly?
You are. Prohibition is prohibition, and it's when you tell someone they can't have something, if they are addicted to it, they are going to find a way to get there. And you mentioned youth and spoke about teenagers. In my 30 plus years of policing, I've met a lot of 20, 30, and 40-year-old teenagers that do things that they shouldn't be doing. So it's illustrative of the fact that people are going to find a way. And when our government steps in to say that, or any government for that matter, it doesn't have to be the federal government, but when our representatives come in and determine these policies that say you're not going to be able to do this, the first thing that happens is those people that are using those products go, I'm going to go figure out a way to get my product. It's illustrated in Massachusetts when you guys, moved against menthol tobacco products. They will find a way. Unfortunately, that's where the intersection of police in the community occur, because now I'm out there dealing with, people that are crossing state lines and bringing large loads of tobacco products back, or dealing with the, people that are unfortunately impacted by some of these unregulated products that are harming our community, as opposed to just helping with tobacco harm reduction. So we have to be careful. We can't allow for policy, scratch that. We should not allow for policy to be written without fully understanding the consequences that it's going to create. And, if we look at policy in terms of silos, I mentioned silos earlier, and recognize that nothing exists in silos, that there are contributing factors to all of the things that cause police and community intersection. That things like poverty, things like mental health issues. Crime just doesn't happen like that. There's always something that contributes to it. So that's...
I want to go to our home base guy, Massachusetts guy here, because 25 communities have adopted this. Now New York and California are looking, and some other communities looking around the country. Guy Bentley at Reason Magazine had a great piece about how in Massachusetts, many of the towns implemented this not through the usual town meeting process, whatever, but the local board of health, which is a very, no one, who the heck knows what your local board of health is doing, have implemented this, and then the town's like, whoa, what have you done? And it's having an impact on businesses, et cetera. And there's a new story at Reason about how California, you're seeing similar tactics. If this is something people want, couldn't you be able to go to your town council or your city government and say, let's pass this as an ordinance? And can you tell us a little more about the process here in Massachusetts and what you've learned?
Well, I mean, there's two ways that you can affect policy, basically. One is through statute, state law, and another is through local regulation. And I think the problem, most of these laws, all of these laws have been implemented at the local level. There was a proposal at the state level for a tobacco-free or nicotine-free generation, but that hasn't gone through yet. The problem, I think, is that we're taking such a narrow view of this problem. It's basically, we see a couple of youth or a small number of youth using some cherry vapes, and it's a crisis. Now, I'm not saying that youth vaping is not a problem, but it's not the crisis that it's being made out to be. I mean, let's look at
there. I think people want to know, what are the health risks that you guys know of related to youth vaping? Actually, and once again, legal, not the people who get vape, put THC in it, whatever. That's a separate issue. But for people, who are using vapes, is it? I mean, obviously, it's not as dangerous as a cigarette, but how dangerous is it?
Well, I think looking at nicotine is not safe. People should not use nicotine. Kids should not use nicotine. But nicotine itself, what does it not do? It doesn't cause lung cancer. It doesn't cause coronary heart disease. It does have effects on the cardiovascular system. It increases blood pressure. It has some short-term acute effects. It is addictive, and addiction is an issue. But then there's such an array of e-cigarettes, but generally speaking, I would point to one analysis by the Royal College in the UK suggested that e-cigarettes are 95% safer, less risky than combustible cigarette smoking. That's probably the far end of the safety spectrum that I've heard, but they're certainly significantly less risky than inhaling the 7,000 plus chemicals that are in combusted smoke.
Dr. Siegel, how dangerous?
So, I mean, the main risk, and really the only significant risk right now that we know about is addiction. I mean, that's the problem that youth are having. Youth who are using e-cigarettes, the only tangible negative right now is the possibility that they become addicted, and that can affect, that can have a negative impact on them. There have been no long-term studies that have demonstrated any impact in terms of chronic disease. Is it possible that these products haven't been on the market that long? Is it possible that down the road we may see some cases of heart disease or lung disease? It's possible. Based on what we know about the toxicology of the product, there's no question that these products are much, much safer than cigarettes.
So I think, Chief, one of the objections to e-cigarettes, and it's the one I have, is people just look dumb when they do it. It's just like, you look, particularly teenagers, there's a big puff of steam around their head. But if I understand this, it's basically just water vapor and some flavoring. Am I in the ballpark there, or is it more complicated than that? And,
That's my understanding, but I'm not the scientist.
do you
so-
agree there's a cult like it? There are people who are saying, those kids ought to just put down those vapes. Officer, arrest them, which is a common tradition, by the way, in the United States, when people don't like what their neighbors are doing.
I think so, but I also think it stems from a lack of education and a lack of understanding of what vaping products actually are. It looks alarming, it
Right,
looks
exactly.
provocative because there's this big plume of vapor that's coming out, but both doctors have been, at least as far as I'm aware, accurate in saying that there's a reason why vaping products, the regulated, those that have been vetted by the FDA, are being approved for use because they can contribute to the cessation of the use of combustible products. But if I can, I mentioned this earlier in my opening statements, the tactic of generational statutes of saying you cannot, if you were born after 2009, you
Right.
can't use these products. Unfortunately, does not work. New Zealand tried it. They very quickly repealed it because what they found was that it did not have the impact that they were looking for. In fact, what it did was create
Black
illicit markets, and again, the intersection of police and the community. So I would very strongly suggest that Massachusetts take a look and perhaps consider some alternatives before they move forward.
So one of our viewers asked the question, what can be done to address the aggressive promotion and marketing of nicotine products on social media and availability of products from online sites for youth? And that is a common complaint I hear, is if you see websites where teenagers go, there's a ton of ads for nicotine products. Gentlemen?
I'll start. We absolutely need to have the FDA move faster to authorize more non-combustible nicotine products, because when the FDA authorizes a product for sale, it can implement marketing restrictions that are designed to protect youth. So the authorization from the FDA, it has marketing restrictions aimed at protecting young people, and the FDA can revoke an authorization if the data shows, too much youth use or the public. So there are authorized products that are subject to federal regulation. Then there are products from overseas, from other manufacturers, that are completely ignoring every rule, law, and regulation on the book. So that's the problem. We have a regulated framework in the United States. We have a regulatory agency that's not authorized enough products to pull adult consumers away from illicit products. And it's the illicit market those are the really bad actors in this space.
In public health, our goal, we understand that people are going to take risks. And the approach is not to ban every product. We can't ban every product that may pose some risk. The approach we take is that we have a regulated market. We try to control to the extent we can, the safety of the product.
Right.
It's a harm reduction approach. Make it as safe as we can. We regulate the marketing so that they can't aggressively go after kids. So the way that you do that, the way you address the aggressive marketing tactics, is that you have a regulated market, not a black market. And as Dr. Willett explained, the products that have been approved have extremely rigorous standards in terms of their marketing. In fact, they have to tell the FDA exactly what their marketing is going to say. Word for word, essentially. And so we know we can completely control the marketing of those products. But as I said, 70% of the e-cigarette market now is illicit. We have no control over those, what those companies say.
So you're in this kind of catch-22 if you're saying, well, we don't want to regulate it because then that says that it's okay to exist and we really want to just ban it. But we can't ban it because we know a ban will be a total collapse. So we'll put it in an age ban, which is kind of a ban. And then all of a sudden, like you said, you have these unregulated products out there where if you just simply embraced, yes, it's safer to vape. Vaping stings, don't do it. But if you can do something, they just can't say those words because
Yeah.
they're fundamentally banners. Is that where we are?
I mean, to be crude, I think the nicotine-free generation policy is a pretty weak approach.
Right.
It's phasing in adult prohibition. It's trying to make adult prohibition politically palatable.
Right.
Right? But it's prohibition. And the fact that it's phased in means, like, when will we ever see whatever the intended public health benefit
Right.
is? Because the public health need is now to help as many people quit smoking as fast as possible. There's real gain that we can realize there. So yeah, I think it's pretty weak sauce.
And is it safe to say that if this is your approach, you're saying to the 30 million Americans who are smoking now, just please go die. Just, get out of our way. You're very expensive. Sure, we could try to encourage you to set down your cigarettes, but that might cause a teenager to pick up a vape, so just die.
I mean, through the current focus on protecting youth at all costs and ignoring any sort of potential harm reduction framework, I think it's clear that some folks in tobacco control have chosen the focus to exclusively focus on youth. That's why it's important to think about both youth and adults, and we can do both at the same time. If the smart people in tobacco control and public health and in government would just put their minds around, how would we do that? How would we really maximize the public health opportunity that's in front of us today?
So I have a question for all three of you. So if nicotine-free generation policies aren't the right end-game strategy, what should public health advocates be pursuing instead to reduce smoking prevalence in the U.S.?
Well, I think the answer is really clear. According to the science, I look to the science for answers. And according to the science, the number one most effective method of smoking cessation in the United States in 2026 is using alternative nicotine products, especially electronic cigarettes.
Right.
That is we have the solution in front of us. And this is what I think the great tragedy is that we don't need to go to the drawing board and try to figure out, is there a way that we can get people to quit smoking realistically? We have the product in front of us. We have the answer. And yet what we're doing is we're shunning that approach. We're putting that aside because we can't tolerate the idea that somewhere, someplace, some youth might be enjoying a cherry vape rather than, getting drunk or getting high. I mean, that's, I think we have to take a bigger picture look. And Michael, if there's anything I've learned in 35 years of studying this issue, it's that youth are going to take risks. That we cannot prohibit youth from taking risks. In fact, one might argue that taking risks is part of the development process. That's to some extent how you mature. We can't stop youth from taking risks. So the question is, can we at least get them to choose risks that are less dangerous and that they're not going to die from?
So I'll jump in. One of the problems that I've seen is the lack of understanding, and that's perhaps our fault, because while forums like what we're experiencing right now, what we're doing here this morning, are great, and we're reaching a wide audience out there on Facebook, there's a world of people out there that really don't understand, and the information that they're receiving, whether it's the commercials that they see, at halftime of a football game or anything, only give a very small picture. And as a society, we haven't done a great job of educating our communities as to what is good, what isn't good. The same goes for our retailers. Now, the doctor indicated that only 14% of or youth are getting their cigarettes or combustible product or vaping products from stores, but most of our retailers really aren't aware of the fact that there's only 41 approved products in the United States versus the thousands that are out there. So when we're talking about education, we really have to, make an effort to, make people understand what's good, what's bad.
So, I think it's important, again, recognize youth use is historically low. Let's keep doing largely what we're doing with young people because it's been very successful. Then let's look at physicians. Most physicians have a misperception around nicotine and the harms that nicotine causes. most physicians believe that nicotine causes cancer, which is absolutely not the case. So groups like the American Medical Association, the American Heart Association, Lung Association, these groups that have networks of physicians should develop an approach where in a clinical encounter, where it's just the doctor and an adult patient, that patient, if they smoke and they've tried other things, can be encouraged to try a lower risk product. But we're not even at a point where doctors understand this. So that's where public health, through educating the target audience, which I would say clinicians and adults who smoke, about lower risk products, about nicotine, about the opportunity to switch if they can't quit others, that would have a huge impact. Then we're not even changing what we're doing with youth because it's working, but we are able to reach millions of people through clinical encounters.
It is astonishing to me that a smoker would be sitting in front of a doctor and the doctor wouldn't say, hey, have you thought about an e-cig? Have you thought about something else? These other products. It seems crazy to me. One of the questions we have is, what is the impact on the surrounding states and communities when they enact prohibition-like policies? Do they lose tax revenue, et cetera? And I will tell you, as an adopted New Englander, I've been here since 2005, every time Massachusetts passes a ban or Maine doubles its taxes, the state of New Hampshire, you can hear the cheers all the way down in Boston because the revenue just comes pouring in. And there's data on that we've reported on at Inside Sources in the past. But is that generally true? Do we have any information on that? And do you have any thoughts?
So we did a study looking at the impact of the flavored electronic cigarette ban and all of the kind of hysteria that was related to there was an outbreak of lung disease that was falsely attributed to electronic cigarettes. So we looked at the impact of that, and we saw three major impacts. First, there was a decrease in e-cigarette use. That was good. The second thing we found is that there was a huge shift in the market where people were going to New Hampshire to get products. In fact, people were actually driving up to New Hampshire and coming back with truckloads, storing up those products. And the third thing we found, and this is the tragic part, is that smoking actually went up. The number of people, the rate of decline in smoking actually, kind of leveled off. And so to me, that's the tragedy because, when it comes down to it, I said earlier, I'm in this because as a physician, I saw people dying of smoking. That's why I'm here, And so to me, that's the priority. And it's when we have a side effect of a policy be more people going back to smoking, that's tragic.
Right. Chief, obviously what's happening with cigarettes in New York and other states that have put very high taxes, and you have the accessibility, whether it's across the border or a Native American area, that's an extreme example, but it is an example of where you can get with prohibition when something is technically illegal but widely available. I thought we learned this from pot. I mean, the idea that you're going to ban something that I can grow in my backyard. Not that I have. Not that the officer, please, no. But can you
Retired officer.
Talk about what happens for law enforcement when you have that kind of illicit and widely available divide between what people want and what they can get without going to a store.
Well, I'm glad we're talking about this because, to the doctor's point, you can go into New Hampshire right now and buy up a truckload of cigarettes and bring them back across the border, which becomes interstate transportation of a non-tax product, which is in fact illegal. So now you're opening up citizens to committing crimes they may or may not have thought of doing. But it takes the problem right to the streets, because when it's not sold in a corner convenience store, then it's sold out of the back of a truck or the back of a car or at someone's home. And when, as I mentioned earlier, organized crime, and in this case street gangs, figure out that it's less problematic to sell cigarettes than it is to sell narcotics, you have them selling these things out in the streets, which brings about all the problems that always exist when organized crime gets into play. The violence, the territorialism, the impact of neighborhoods when I have to now come in because this gang is fighting this gang over this one particular corner.
We actually have a follow-up question on this. What has enforcement looked like in countries like New Zealand that tried to do these age bans? And did it come with an increase in police spending and policing costs?
It did, because of the increase in the illicit market, which is a strong contributing factor to why New Zealand ended up repealing that law and saying, no, this does not work. The problem with all of these policies is that there's no thought of enforcement. When the FDA began to consider prohibiting menthol, and they put it in the hands of the public health department, saying that they'd be the ones to enforce it, the public health department doesn't have the infrastructure to go out and enforce things that are prohibited out in the streets. So that ultimately results in law enforcement having to come in and be that person or be that entity that enforces this law. So in New Zealand, as I mentioned before, it created that illicit market that then caused New Zealand law enforcement to go out and deal with those products that were being sold by just the people that I'm mentioning.
Dr. Willett?
Let's look at New Zealand's neighbor, Australia. Australia passed a policy that removed e-cigarettes from traditional retailers and moved them to pharmacy sales only.
Really?
So it just restricted the location. And the illicit market in Australia has exploded with that one change that seemed sensible.
Exactly.
But there's no appreciation for the market, for consumers, for how folks are. And the illicit market there is incredibly dangerous. There is organized crime. Australia is really struggling to figure out what to do with this. They're basically on the verge of a war on vapes, a drug war sort of equivalent. And what I would say to everybody watching, regardless of your opinions about nicotine and tobacco, the United States does not need a drug war with tobacco, right? We don't need prohibition. We don't need stringent enforcement that's targeting people who use these products. There's a sensible path forward that we need to take.
A quick follow-up too for you again, Chief. Someone's asking, who is usually on the receiving end of the enforcement when it comes to these illicit tobacco nicotine products? Is it the smuggler or is it the customer?
It's rarely the smuggler, especially if it's a large-scale operation. It's very difficult to get to those people that are bringing the stuff across the border or bringing it into the United States. It's that person that's selling it out of the back of their car. And it's also the customer that's going up to buy it. Now consider if you say you can't, use this particular product, and I'm 16 years old and I go and I find a way to get it, and then a police officer through the course of their investigation stops that 16-year-old to say, hey, come here for a minute, where'd you get it? In this day and age, when we're seeing negative interactions between the police and the community almost on a daily basis, if that 16-year-old decides they're going to either run or fight as opposed to being allowed to be stopped, that turns into, or has the potential of turning into, a very dangerous situation between the police and the community, which was what brings me here today and what I'm trying to avoid.
Dr. Siegel?
I think it's important for people to know that youth have died from vaping. Let me explain this. This is really important for people to understand. Youth have died from vaping. There were more than 50 deaths and more than 1,000 people hospitalized from a vaping-related severe lung illness. And this was in 2019. But what caused that? What caused that was illicit vape products that had THC in them and were laced with an additive called vitamin E acetate. That was what caused the problem. And so the black market is really the greatest threat to the health of youth when it comes to substance abuse. The things that are killing youth in terms of substance abuse, the number one cause of death is not vaping, it's alcohol.
Right.
Yet what are we doing with flavored alcohol? Nothing. In fact, flavored alcohol, it's becoming more available.
Sure.
Now you can get seltzers and ciders with alcohol and enticing flavors. The number two cause of substance-related death among youth is illicit drugs that where either you have THC vapes that were adulterated, or other drugs that they're buying off the street, even cannabis that can be tainted with other
like fentanyl, things like that.
Fentanyl or other products. Those are the two greatest threats that we face, and I think that we have to acknowledge that when it comes to these illicit drugs, it's really the last thing in the world we want to do is create a completely unregulated market.
Right.
And I think the bottom line is public health is about regulation. It's about having a well-regulated market with rational regulations. And somehow we've lost sight of that.
So can I just,
Please.
The doctor mentioned fentanyl, and I wanted to kind of, from a law enforcement point of view, one of the things we're seeing is that fentanyl is being mixed into a lot of these products because of its addictive nature, and because of the effects. It's an opiate, so it's going to give an effect to it. So we have to understand that there are entities out there that are calculating how best to make further product. And if they can include a substance like fentanyl into a vaping device that ends up hitting the streets and ultimately causing the death of 50 individuals, they're not going to care about that. They're not going to go, well, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. They're going to go back to the lab and try to figure out how they can put a little bit less fentanyl in there just to make it usable, and they can still make their money. So this is, I'm saying that to say that, or to illustrate that we really, really have to be aware of the fact that there are people out there making a concerted effort to introduce substances and products on our streets that can be very, very harmful, far more harmful than combustible tobacco products.
Well, I just want to thank the three of you, Dr. Siegel, Dr. Willett, and Chief Harris, for being here and being part of this conversation. I think it's been a fascinating and informative conversation despite my participation. And I love that we're having here in Boston, because I used to be a radio talk show host in Boston where one of my mottos was zero tolerance equals 100% stupidity. That the more you try to get to no one's going to be bad, the more dumb things you do that harm more people. And the two local examples that we had, one was there was a successful move to make it illegal to sell cigarettes in drugstores. And people were asking, oh my gosh, why would you sell cigarettes in a place where people are supposed to go for health? It's such a terrible message. I'm like, no. You want people who smoke in drugstores as opposed to liquor stores and lottery stores, because the people who work at a drugstore might have some health knowledge. They might be able to say, hey, man, have you thought about, have some impact? But because of this idea that, well, we're going to find a level of cultural purity or lifestyle purity, you're going to abandon these smokers to the guy selling lottery tickets, was just so dumb. And the second thing was when one of the private large pharmacy companies, who I won't say their name, but their initials are CVS, started the Minute Clinic program, the city of Boston said, no, you can only have government-run Minute Clinic. We can't have the private. I'm like, why do you care? If the outcome is better, isn't that enough? And what we've learned in so many of these conversations about public health is that there are so many other considerations than the outcome. And if you just focus on the outcome, maybe age bans work, maybe they don't. But look at the outcome, not how does it make you feel as a person when you passed it. That was my experience here in Boston. It's been a very enlightening conversation. For all of you who participated, thanks for the great questions. You can find the entire video at InsideSources.com's YouTube page. Transcript is available as well for you to quote from, etc. If you have any questions or want follow-up, just email us at news@InsideSources.com. I'm Michael Graham. Silver, clear? Clear.
All right.
That was very good.
All right,
survived.
yeah, that was
You were very, you were very good.